Hello, this is Mr. Sexton again, getting ready to start, believe it or not, day 9 of the winter semester. And today we are going to be talking about Chapter 7, which deals with the media. The chapter that we'll be talking about today is one of the briefer chapters that we'll cover in the semester. But before I get into a discussion of this chapter, make sure you realize that in addition to today's chapter and today's chapter textbook quiz, you also have an assignment known as the elected officials preparation assignment that you'll have to take. That assignment is listed on the Moodle site right below the daily chapter quiz. But in addition, there is a short video that I want you to watch that lays out some of the directions and some of the suggestions I make and requirements I have for completing that assignment. So in addition to watching this video, make sure you watch that video also. Okay, what we're going to talk about today is Chapter 7, dealing with the media. And as you can probably tell, the chapter covering the media has changed over the years because media has changed. As you know, today the media is different than it has been in the past. In the past, the media really was just newspapers, and then along comes radio, and along comes television. Well, today, of course, we have the internet and all of the social media that goes along with it. So for this chapter, some of the things that you'll need to understand and pull out of there is to understand what we consider traditional media. And when we talk about the traditional media, we're talking about print media, magazines, newspapers, those types of things. And then the other part of what we call traditional media is the broadcast media. And when we're talking about broadcast media, we're talking about basic television and radio that is broadcast generally over the public airways that you can get in your house without having to pay a subscription for. Okay? So make sure you understand those definitions of the traditional media, and then as we talk about today's new media, or what we call the digital era in media. Okay? Now, also, you need to understand how the introduction of the internet and the introduction of all this other social media has impacted the new media business we're in today. In the past, it was relatively easy to control the newspapers or control the television because you had a person or a select group of people who owned the radio station or owned the television station or owned the newspaper, and they controlled what went in it. But as you're aware, with today's internet, just about anybody, including a professor who thinks he knows how to make engaging videos, can post things to the internet. And it becomes much more difficult to regulate and to keep control of. Okay? Having so many people being able to place information into the media realm has its advantages and its disadvantages. Make sure as you're reading the chapter you pick up on both the advantages and the disadvantages that the internet has introduced to today's new media. Okay? Also, in the chapter, you need to highlight and make sure you understand the components that talk about how the media, both the traditional and today's new media, influence public opinion. And not only do they influence public opinion, but they also influence the politicians, the people running for political office, the people that are already in political office. Again, in the past, it was, different when the broadcast media or the print media was trying to influence elected officials or the public because there was only a handful of these quote-unquote media outlets. But today, with so many different sources of information that are inundating the public and inundating our elected or public officials, it tends to have a much more amplified impact. And again, let's go back to some of the benefits and disadvantages of having so much media access. And that will talk to you about the positive impacts that the new media has on public opinion and our elected officials. But it will also talk about and highlight some of the problems that we find. Okay? Now, also in this textbook chapter, they talk about not only how the media impacts public opinion and elected officials, it also talks some about how public officials attempt to control the media. We see a lot of times on the news that when something happens in the White House, for example, something that could be a big, huge story that all the media would be focusing on, the White House will try and release something else, some other piece of information, or make some announcement to try and overshadow it. There are techniques that these politicians use to try and manage and shape the media reports of the day. Make sure you're familiar with how they do that. Okay? And the last thing in the chapter that you need to pick up on and make sure you understand is how the government attempts to regulate broadcast media. And make sure you understand that we are emphasizing the fact that the government can and does regulate broadcast media, but they have a problem regulating other sources of media, the internet and subscription satellite radio or subscription television like cable and things of that nature. It's much different in the government trying to regulate those non-broadcast type medias than it was in the past when the government and the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, was trying to regulate broadcast media. Okay? And your textbook talks about a couple pretty specific examples of how the FCC has regulated broadcast media. Okay? And continuing with that, and the final thing that they're going to talk about in the textbook is they're going to talk about this idea of how the internet and all of the ways that private citizens can broadcast on the internet, how that has made it difficult, more difficult for the government and for society as a whole to try and regulate untruthful or misleading information that is presented out there on the internet. Make sure you pick up on that. Okay? Now, in addition, make sure you watch the video that is online that describes the process and procedures by which you need to complete the elected officials preparation assignment. As always, if you have any questions, give me a call.